Welcome, everyone. I'm Chari Elam with the Bee Supply Monthly Magazine. I've said that a time or two correctly, so go back and watch it on that. I got a great guest today. If you haven't heard of Cameron Jack, and I probably should put doctor before that, huh?
Doctor sounds a little stuffy. We'll just go.
It does. Super intelligent, great, personable person. I had the joy of meeting at the Bee Expo 2024, and we even got to sit down and visit. And I brought him in this month because he has some good intellect on a bug that bugs our bug that I want to talk about in this segment. So anyway, welcome, Cameron.
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
Sure. Well, so those that don't know, let's talk a little bit about who you are, what you do, and that university that you call home.
All right. Yeah. So I'm a little bit about me. I'm originally from the West. I'm from Nevada. I grew up in a small town just kind of northeast of Las Vegas, and so I kind of was just introduced to beekeeping at an early age. My grandpa was a sideliner who was a high school principal and supplemented his income through bees. And so I was just one of those things that I grew up around. I like to tell people is like I liked bees before it was cool because like when I was a kid it was weird. Like people didn't keep bees, at least anywhere around where I lived. And so um anyways, it was definitely not something that I thought I'd actually make a career out of. I just had kind of grown up around it, and then it wasn't until later I was in college and trying to figure out what am I going to do with the rest of my life.
Mm.
I knew that I really liked science. I actually knew that I liked teaching, and so I kind of just thought I was going to be like a biology teacher in high school or something. And then just towards the very end of my undergrad, I kind of got in with somebody who was doing some research. They were actually doing bat research, so I did bat research for a little while, and that's what kind of caught my research interest. And all of a sudden, kind of like all these things clicked in my mind is like, how can I continue to do science and to do teaching and to do research? And I already knew I liked bees, so I had this like in the back. I don't know, I just found a way to bring it together, and I mean, it sounds a little corny, but like I'm truly in my dream job. Like I really love what I do, and I was really fortunate to come to the University of Florida. I've been here for 10 years. 4 of those years, I guess I was a PhD student working with Dr. Jamie Ellis. But then I've been a faculty now for about 6 years,
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, getting to do more of what I try to combine all those passions and all kind of centered around bees and honeybee and beekeeping.
It's so cool, and to be able to circle back and work with Dr. Ellis.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
his office is right next to mine, and
I
so
mean, that's like living next to a rock star, isn't it?
yeah, and then Amy Vu is
Yes, Amy.
just down the hallway as well, and so I'm truly blessed to be able
I bet you do. Every
to
once in a
work.
while you think to yourself and go,
Yeah. Yeah,
God
cool
did
place, cool
good.
facility, a really good university with good people. It's really great. The only
That's,
complaint I have is there's no mountains, but
there's no mountains.
yeah, I mean, I grew up in the mountains and camping and
Yeah.
hiking and all those things, and it's hard to do that where I'm at. But I'm learning to love other things like the water,
Uh,
which I never.
well, at least it's pretty water over there.
Yeah,
And
some
for all
very
those
pretty.
that live along the Texas Gulf Coast, you know
Yeah,
what I mean. I love it, but it ain't pretty.
yeah,
It's kind of a mud hole, but
yeah.
that's okay. Yeah, I've interviewed Jamie a couple of times, and super cool that you get to work a door down, and Amy's in my sights, so I do look forward to talking with her about it. Well, I've got several things, and I don't know how far we'll get, but I really just, because you're on the pulse of this, and it is your daily to be there. And I don't want to point this out because I practice the word, y'all, better than the Bee Supply Monthly Magazine. is that your research efforts are focused on honeybee epidemiology. Yes, hold it up. Say it.
Epidemiology. That's what I want to
Epidemiology. See, I even wrote it down where it sounded like, and I messed it up. Okay, epidemiology and toxicology. See, I
Yeah,
can talk.
you
Uh,
got it.
I, that, that's so far reaching. Anybody that doesn't know what epidemiology is, that's the, honeybee health can be threatened by a variety of factors, including pests, pathogens, pesticides, poor nutrition, and climate change. These factors can interact with each other, making it difficult to determine the cause of a colony's death. Had to look that up too. Um, in that you are really into that, what is the overall honeybee health? Where are we? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so I mean, you just kind of listed off a bunch of factors, right? Like that
Yeah,
are all impacting honeybee health, and they all have significant impacts, right? I mean, there's lots of changes kind of going on in our world. I mean, compared to like maybe the last 30 years or so, right? Like there's just the world is more global. There's lots more transmission between species. As we're moving things around, there's introductions of new pests and pathogens all the time. Viruses are moving around as we're moving bees around. So, I mean, the state of it, it's like my job is to like kind of get down to some of these cores of like what's happening and what are those impacts. And then, I mean, what we end up probably spending most of our time is like, how do we mitigate those impacts?
right.
And try to make it better for the beekeepers and that are managing these bees. Um, and oftentimes we're just like met with more questions than we have answers to, right? And some of these questions, well, we have some questions, but maybe we don't have the technology or the money to like really dig in. This is the thing, Sherry, about honeybee research that I kind of want everybody to know and think about. It's just because obviously there's a million things that we'd love to do and love to explore, but like it's difficult because bees are just kind of varied in nature, right? Like there's just so many different, like if you've been a beekeeper for any amount of time, like you might have, you know, 3 colonies on a hive stand in your backyard, and you know that they're all foraging on basically the same things. They're kind of all like you know, getting some of the same experiences and exposure to the weather and everything, but for some reason one colony is doing really good, one colony is doing okay, and one colony is just on death's door,
Right.
right? And this is just kind of the reality and the nature of bees in general and beekeeping. I mean, they are, there are still enough differences and enough variation that it becomes hard to study and find meaningful examples. Basically, in short, we need a lot of bees to do our research, right? And to,
Yeah.
because you have to be able to count for all those variations and see if there are some big general trends. So it makes research a little hard. It makes it a little slow. It makes it
Mhm.
very expensive. And it's just really the nature of the beast that we love. So
It is. And it kind of, and hearing you talk about that, it's almost like humans because each one of us, we can all, be even related. And one of our family members, has a lot of health problems and the others are super healthy. And it makes you wonder, well, what was different about that one person or where they were, what they were exposed to? And I think a lot of and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of bee issues are location, location,
yep,
location, and
definitely.
their background, their genealogy, so to speak. Is that right? I mean, it
Oh
is.
yeah. Yeah, location is huge. But then as you said, even or like bees that are in the same location, I mean, there are background factors that will make them respond differently. So
Right.
you might be in a location where maybe there's low pollen availability or
Mhm.
something like that, right? And if you might have one colony that just is got a queen that's on the fritz or something, right? Like there's
Yeah.
something else happening, and for some reason one colony is able to hang on, and while one colony is just tanking. Um, but just land use and general nutrition in the environment is just such a big issue for bees, and it's one that has a very difficult answer. Like, what do you do when your environment is not good? Well, you try to move out of the way, but where do you move your bees? Well, it's getting harder to move bees out of the way because there's a lot more people than there used to be, and a lot more buildings, and a lot more competition with other
So
animals that need those resources. And so it just that's a solution or a problem that's uh, kind of a more difficult solution because it involves people.
it
Like
involves
other
us.
things, yeah,
Mhm,
exactly. Like other things, maybe we can manipulate if they're just involving bees or
mhm.
parasite or something. But when it involves people, it's a
I
hard.
find myself, because I have been a beekeeper. I can't talk today. It's Monday.
It's
That's the
Monday.
problem. I, I've been doing it for a long time, and I find myself doing more shuffling internally with this hive, borrowing from this hive and trading
Mhm.
assets back and forth,
Sure.
and finding that that's being more required than it ever was before. I mean, used to, we could put out, 25 colonies in a certain spot, and yeah, 10 or 20% might not do well, but that's just the law of averages, right? But then now I'm looking at more than half of them want to have components revolved around where I'm pulling frames and I'm doing that more often than I ever have in the past. And I think that if I pull anything out of what you've been talking about, is that we've got to almost have more bees, for us too, the beekeeper, not just the researcher, but have more bees in order to share amongst themselves to keep them all going healthy.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, beekeeping is becoming less of a passive
Oh,
pastime,
for
right? And
sure.
much more of an intense management requirements. I mean, I told you my grandpa kept bees, and
Yeah.
so, when he was a beekeeper 30, 40 years ago, I mean, he was putting his bees out in a field, and then he would stack up on some honey supers and be like, I'll see you in a few months, and then come back, pull those out. And
Yeah,
it's just not that way anymore.
it is not.
There's so much out there in the
So
environment.
much management's required, and our world is growing, and you're right, it's humans, that I remember doing I think I did it for ABF, a deal about a colony collapse disorder, and I researched it really, really heavily, and what it was, and basically, and I pretty much all boiled down to Varroa, really, when it all drilled way down deep into it, but it's everything. It is everything. It's concrete, it's the air, it's pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, it's everything that we deal with on a daily basis. All right, so we really didn't solve any world issues there, but I think we came to a clear
We're
understanding.
setting the stage for it.
It's setting the stage, right? So in nutrition, we talk about, especially in the magazine and on our webinar every month, about the importance of feeding. Um, do you, what's your input on nutrition as far, and of course, you're in Florida, you're in the tropics.
Well,
Yeah.
so kind of yes and no. Like where we're at in Florida is like the north central, like we're not really in this like our climate's very similar to like southern Georgia, and and it's not too tropical until you get like south of Orlando.
Right.
But what like where we're at, it's tricky because we're just surrounded by oaks and pines, and
Yeah.
actually not a lot of great forage for bees. One thing that I feel like we've got, like, this is not true everywhere, but a lot of Florida has a lot of some blooming plants that are good pollen producers. So I
Mm.
feel like we're not as pressed to be like providing protein to
Mhm.
our bees, but we have some long nectar dearths. We have like usually good flows until from like March to May, we've got a good solid season, but then we got basically nothing for the rest of the year. We might get a little bit in the fall. From it kind of depends on where you are. If you're down in South Florida, there, there's some other
Yeah.
options. But at least where we're at, we have a hard time managing like nutritional, like carbohydrate stress, like needing that
Yeah.
energy that they would get from nectar and honey, right? So we find that we have to feed a lot. If we're gonna collect honey and not just let them keep it, then we're gonna have to be feeding most of the year.
Us too.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty even with you. So I'm Southeast Texas.
Yeah, that's true. We're probably about the
Right
same
on the same
latitude.
plane. And that is so true. And I think that that's really important to tell that everybody know as you're learning in your journey of beekeeping is to know just what you said, Cameron, is what's my strong suit, what's not. So we have pollen a lot of the year, but nectar is where we don't shine and
Yeah.
get ready to buy sugar, be that person everybody stares at when you go through the grocery line.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
and
and
we feed right after we extract, which we're feeding right now, so.
sure. Yeah, I mean, we are feeding right now too. We as a researcher, unless there's a project that like we're specifically measuring like honey production and stuff, we're not usually managing our bees in a way to be able to do that. Like I have the opposite problem of all beekeepers in the world. Sherry's like, all right, I can't get enough Varroa because like I need sick bees so I can study them,
Right.
right? And
Right.
have the parasites on them
Mhm.
so that I can study them. So we have like kind of a unique beekeeping challenge as a research lab.
Mhm.
Um, but we still have to make, I mean, our bees aren't going to survive if
Careful
they
out,
don't have
yeah,
those nutrients, right? So we got to
right.
make sure we're usually pretty well set, like I said, on the pollen. What I'll say to people that might be listening that maybe are new or worried about it, maybe you're in an area where you don't have great pollen resources, that there are supplements and things that you can feed. In my general experience, the bees are just much more likely to eat down pollen. So kind of
Mhm.
one of the things we were doing is like when we see a colony is getting pollen bound, like instead
Mhm.
of honey, like they're not
Right,
making a lot of honey,
right.
they're like they don't, even if they wanted to make honey, they couldn't because they've packed in so much pollen, which happens a lot for us. We'll take
Mhm.
out those frames, put them in a super, and then seal it up in some kind of bag, like garbage bag, or you can buy like a bag to cover a super and stick it in the freezer. You have to kind of preserve it a little bit or else it kind of decomposes, kind of gets a little
Right,
gross.
the enzymes start souring really is
Yeah,
is,
but
yeah.
then we can feed it back to bees, no problem, and kind of keep that protein later when they need it, when they're producing brood.
And people don't think about that you can save those pollen frames back too. I will never forget being told about pollen bound. We were working with a commercial beekeeper and we are not commercial beekeepers. I will stand on a mountain and say never will be. I went to, I fondly call it bee camp, and was working a week with a commercial beekeeper, kicked my rear end. I'm gonna just say that out loud. And he said something about being pollen bound, and I thought, oh, but it's pollen. I was not new into the world of beekeeping, but they were just trashing it basically. Because I mean, if you've got hundreds and hundreds of those, you can't stick them back in the freezer. So he was
Sure.
trashing them, and I thought, what are you doing? People
Yeah.
would die to have this, right? But
Yeah.
it is. And there's an article coming up in this August issue about that
Oh,
as well.
I,
So,
I mean, for people that are interested, because you're right, like you might not have the space to store a bunch of pollen either. Like, so I don't say I don't use this often unless I'm kind of doing a study. But another option is you can go get one of those, like a pollen trap. Basically what it does is it scrapes pollen off of bees. So obviously you have to be very careful. Bees need pollen. They need the
yeah.
protein to raise bees. So you got to be careful and not leave it on for too long. But when we know that we are going, like we are pollen bound or we're going to become pollen bound, and we know our bees are we can stand at the entrance and you're just watching them bringing pollen and you're
Mhm.
thinking like, no, I don't want you to be pollen bound. I want you to have some space so you can keep laying, or so that
Right.
you can bring in some honey later. What I suggest throwing on a trap or two, like just move them on a hive once a day or something, and then collecting those corbicular pollen, because then you can easily feed that back to bees as well. And then it fits
True.
nicely in a freezer, and it's not big supers that you're storing. You can put that
Yeah.
in your kitchen freezer and it won't take up too much space. So
I've never even thought of that. That's a
yeah.
great idea, because I get called all the time, y'all sell pollen? Well, we don't harvest pollen. Good idea, very good idea. Well, let's talk about pests, because I know
Okay.
this is where you shine, and it's that, the V word. The bug that bugs our bug. Um, Primarily, let's talk about Varroa, and I want to talk about OA, oxalic acid,
Sure.
because I have really tried to stay up on where you are with that and what the latest dosing has come about and where it landed. Would you catch us up on where the oxalic acid dosing has landed for now?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with us. Like, there are actually a few different ways to apply oxalic acid. There are three ways legally in the United States, right? There is dribbling it. So you're mixing it into a sugar syrup, you're trickling it onto the bodies of the bees. There is vaporizing it, where you're heating it and turning it into a gas and basically like fumigating inside of a honeybee colony. And then the third one is like mixing it into a syrup and spraying it onto packages before you install bees, or just packaged bees. So those are the three legal ways. So with a lot of my research, that actually started during my PhD, and it was one of those things where I just intended to kind of do one project because I was interested in it, and then it kind of started spinning out of control, and like I was doing lots of projects related to OA vapor, just because at the time, a few years ago, people were starting to do it and talk about it, but nobody really had done any research on it. So, or at least not in the United States. And so I was trying to just answer some questions for our beekeepers in Florida. And so basically what we concluded was just that the current legal limit, the dose that we were allowed to use for OA vapor, was just not enough. It was not working. But we found through other experiments that when we increased that dose, it did work, and it was really an effective treatment. So where does it stand with like the label change and things like that? Well, at the time when I was doing my research a few years ago, there was not really a label, in the sense that there wasn't a product. There wasn't a product label. There was an emergency use permit that the USDA allowed, because people were using OA and found that OA was effective, but there was no registered product for it. It was just people were getting OA from any source. And so they kind of set some rules of like, okay, here's how you should use it. But now, just a few years ago, now there are some products that are the registered product. So technically you need to follow the label of those products. So there is one that is just like a bag of OA that is like for apabioxal is the trade name. I mean, it's mostly just pretty much just OA, oxalic acid, but that label for the most part is in an amendment process, but at the moment it still says 1 gram for
Really?
vaporization. But there is another product that has been released, or has started to be registered. It's not registered in every state, so you should definitely check. But it is registered in a lot of states now, and its product is called Easy Ox,
Yes. Good for that.
and that is registered at 2 grams, so twice as much as apabioxal. Now, I know that apabioxal is they're scrambling to get their label amended. I mean, we've been in talks with them for a while, and it's a process for sure, because it's not just up to the company. Like
Right.
they've got to go through the EPA and other regulatory systems to be able to like demonstrate that this label should be changed and is safe for the environment, is safe for the bees, is safe for the person, right? So there's a lot of steps to it. So it's not just something that you can snap your fingers and make the change. And we've been trying to provide kind of not trying to provide. My job as a scientist is just to be a seeker of truth, right? And so we've designed some studies where we have purposefully used higher than legally allowed doses, kind of with the purpose to show whether or not this impacts our honeybees, whether or not it is more effective at controlling Varroa. And kind of consistently in the last few publications that we've done, when we've gone above that 1 gram limit, and we get better success. And so we always stick to that, like at either like 2 or 4 grams per brood chamber is what we're talking about. And so, yeah, the label is being amended for apibioxol. Easy-Ox has been able to do 2. Personally, I'd like to see it a little bit higher, but it kind of depends. I mean, it doesn't make sense to do it higher than 2 grams in every situation. So, and I should also note that when you're talking about other OA applications like the dribble, the
Yeah.
label rate that you do have legal access to as part of the label on either Easy-Ox or apibioxol seems to work pretty well. The trick, I think, to make sure that people know and understand that are listening to this is that with oxalic acid, and this is true for a lot of natural chemical compounds, is that they are water soluble, they break down quickly, which makes them not hang around for long periods of time. And so you're going to have to, usually they could be really effective for that, but they're kind of like a one-time blast, and then you gotta kind of do spread it out. Now there's a big exception to this in the OA world. There's a new product that has recently been registered, kind of gone through the US hoops, but as far as I know, at the moment, this recording is not yet registered in the hands of beekeepers yet, but there's a product that's coming out that's called Varroxans. And that is intended to be an oxalic acid product that is more stable and like lasts longer inside of the hive, which is different from, I mean, like when you're comparing oxalic acid, like dribble or vapor, compared to like a chemical, like a strip of chemicals that, I mean, the purpose of that strip is like that's impregnated with that compound and it lasts a long time. It kind of gives
Well,
you
that's what that
coverage.
is. It's a different delivery system. It's a strip like
So the
Apivar.
Varroxans, yeah, it's a different delivery system, and it's formulated differently. It's not just pure OA, whereas like when you buy it from Apibioxol, it's like 99.5% OA. And same with Easy-Ox. It's pretty much,
Right.
it's just OA
Sure.
and a little bit of a binding agent to help it stay in like a tablet form for Easy-Ox tablets. But for Varroxan, it is mixed. I mean, there's other ingredients in there to kind of keep it stable
Stable.
longer, so it doesn't just dissolve instantly like the other
Huh.
ones do.
So like carrying agents for any other kind of drug or
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just not
interesting.
a carrier. Roxanne is very new. There's only one lab in the United States that I know of that's tested it and like
Oh,
published it and done anything with it. Um, but I hope to get my hands on and
yeah.
provide some
It could
answers
take a
to
minute. We're kind of slow at that in the States, kind of slow at getting new products.
getting things out. Yep.
Yeah, I wasn't great when I started beekeeping. That's a joke. I really was, but where you are now. I've got so many questions out of what you said. So, if someone has some of the apibioxol, can they up the dose and feel okay about that? Or I know you can't say that, we have to follow the directions,
You got to
but
follow the
we
directions.
have to follow the directions.
But I mean, the label's the
And
law,
leave it
right?
there.
Like, so I'm
Label,
a big believer in like just getting that label changed, and
yeah,
putting the pressure on the company to like change things when
yeah.
things need to be changed. And you can speak volumes by using your dollar to buy other products that,
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, that's how we
Mm-hmm.
make these changes
True.
possible, and like really put pressure on people to keep things updated. And I will say, I mean, it's not just the company's fault. Like they've got regulations and things that they've got to deal with. So it's not a quick fix for anybody really.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but yeah, I'm going to go on a limb here and say the vast like majority of state inspectors, like they don't have time to like just go check everybody's hive and swab it and be like, well, it looks like you
Grams did
used
you put in
two
there?
grams. Yeah. But
Well,
that's why I think we do our best to change the label.
right.
can. And
And I'm gonna ask this question for a friend, and that's the truth, because we're having a conversation about it the other night over dinner, and about the issue with it when we vaporize, you've got the bottom deep and then you've got the top. Do we feel like we're getting a good full distribution of the vapor with both boxes? Do you feel like the bottom deep is getting more? Should we leave it on a little longer? Of course, a lot of this is timed, that how long we leave it on there till it's dissipated in the machinery. But do you have any input on the amount of
on the
deep and what the
distribution around.
efficacy is? You
So
got that?
you got to think of this as two parts, right? I mean, one is like how much away are you heating up, because that's going to determine, how far it can go. But then also the volume of that
Mhm.
is the actual cavity. So how many boxes you're stacking up,
Mhm.
because obviously the more, if you keep adding supers, you just have more and more volume, and it's going to eventually have a limit, right? So, so yes, to answer your question very simply, yes, it does matter. It will make a difference. But what that difference is I truly don't really know. For the sake of a lot of my research, when I am trying to have clear cut research so that I
Mhm.
don't leave doubt. Um, so purposes of standardization, when I'm doing it, I'm usually just doing a single brood chamber and
Mhm.
maintaining colonies in that way so that I can have
Mhm.
answer the questions that I'm
Mhm.
after. I do think this is a separate question of like a good research project that can be done. And Lewis Bartlett, Jennifer Berry at UGA have kind of done some work where they were doing vaporization in double deeps at 3 grams of OA vapor, and they had like some effect. But I think you could really design a nice study in the future of having
I look forward to that.
yeah, of having different sizes and kind of knowing what the effectiveness is. I've got a good friend named Bill Hesbach that's in Connecticut, and he's just a brilliant man, and he I'll let him tell the story some other time if you ever wanted to interview Bill. But he has all these leftover plexiglass, and he's been building uh, beehives from plexiglass, so you can see every inch inside
Wow.
of the hive. And one of the things he's wanted to do, and he's started to do, he showed me a little video, is like vaporizing inside to kind of get an idea of like how do we see where a lot of the OA vapor settles on the inside and things like that.
Huh.
So I mean, there's a
Interesting.
lot of different ways that we could kind of go after this question,
Hmm.
and look into it. But
That's cool.
very simply speaking, yes, it will make a difference if you have if you have multiple brood chambers and super honey supers and stuff on there. The more space that you give it, then it's going to affect the amount of OA that's spread throughout, and potentially where
And
it's,
population. I mean, if your population is super duper dense, I would think that would make a difference.
yeah, there's a lot of surface area for it to land on if there's
And
lots of
right. I mean, there's just so many ifs, ands, or buts on that one. You mentioned honey supers. So I saw this on social media the other day we won't call it arguing back and forth. We'll call it banter
okay.
back and forth of,
It's a nice
well,
way
you
to do it.
can't have it, you can't have honey supers on and use OA. And, this one, a lot of disagreement. It was probably 50-50. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that it still states on the products you can't. What's your say on that?
Off the top of my head right now, I can't tell you if there's an up I'm an updated, like if the labels themselves have been updated on like Apabiox or Easy Ox. But well, I'll say the FDA came out and said we are no longer looking for oxalic acid in honey. And so they kind of put that out there as like the government doesn't really care, because the OA that they find in honey is like generally really low amounts that don't hurt people. Like, I mean, oxalic acid is in a lot of the food that we eat,
Right, exactly,
and
exactly.
and even at really high concentrations that, I mean, obviously you can't just sit there and eat away, like there is a toxic effect, right?
Of course.
But like what they're finding in honey in the past and stuff, it's well below any
Yeah.
threshold that any for human consumption that we'd really be worried about. So the fact that they've kind of said that has kind of led people to be say like, oh yeah, you can do this with honey superzon. And so the default question is always comes down to like, what does it say on the label?
Mhm.
And it's up to the labels to get changed. And you know, Chari, it's one of those things we're talking right now, and I could be wrong. Like I would need to go look at those labels, and some of them they might be different. They might be changed. I just can't think of it off the
As far
top.
as I know, they're not. As far as I know, the last time I looked, it wasn't all that long ago. So I think you're
Okay.
right on that. What do you think? And of course, this is going hedge researcher, but he's a biologist. Randy Oliver and his shop towel. I call it the shop towel. He's now sponges, or was the last time he did it. I will say before you answer, I was very blessed to be part of a local version of that study along with him and a youth student that was part of our club that did a mirrored study with shop towels back in probably, oh gosh, 17, maybe 2017, 18. And we had almost zero efficacy for that study of putting OA and glycerin on a shop towel then, and now the sponge, which is getting a little bit better traction. That is a different delivery method, and that goes beyond your 3. Do you have any input on that? Have y'all looked into that delivery method at all?
So we did a study that we recently published, where we were testing different chemical treatments by season and just trying to see, you know, when should beekeepers be applying some treatments? Like when would we expect to see the greatest efficacy for those treatments? And one of the ones that we did test was OA shop towels. And we did this, it's been a couple years now since we did the work, but it takes a while to go through the publication process. So it's
Sure.
just kind of now being released. Um, and we did not really have any good success. The best that we had with it was that in the summertime, there were after 2 months of like putting on the treatment and then 2 months like going after and sampling, you know, at best we were keeping populations stable, but not really reducing them, which I think there's a place for that, you know, in the bee world. Like sometimes
To stay stable.
we just need to stay stat like if we're yeah, it's so much more effective to be treating in the winter and in the spring. Like that's when we can really knock down our mites and it keeps them low for longer periods of time. So, but sometimes you might just need to hang on during the summer and the fall if you've got a flow and things like that, right? You just don't want the mites to like spike. So
Yeah.
there's a place for that.
Yeah.
However, like from our work and some other like Georgia, Alabama, like some, you know, kind of in the southeastern United States, most of the folks I've talked to have not had as great success with that. But then when I talk to a lot of beekeepers in the West and, you know, where it's in the Southwest where it's really dry, you know, they've actually had really good success with it. And so the way that it is delivered is probably going to make a huge difference, and being able to find something that find the right formula that makes it work is important. And like I said, I mean, with this new product called Varroa that is like an extended release
Mhm.
oxalic acid thing. I mean, we'll have more opportunities
I
to
look
test
forward
that.
to that. I look forward to that because what I thought, and the shop towels didn't work for us at all. And we attribute it to the, humidity, because our humidity is a little on the high side most of the
Yeah.
time. Yours, like yours. But that extended relief, I really picture that almost like, we have a room deodorizer hanging in the corner. And it's good for a certain amount of time. It would be awesome to have a product that we could just put in the hive and let it just hang out without any adverse effects, but just keep those levels in check would be awesome, wouldn't it?
I mean, it's It's super important that we keep them low. So there's
Yep.
gonna be times of the year, like I said, where you just gotta throw everything at them, get those mites really low.
Yep.
And then there's times where you just gotta keep them at that level, keep them from growing. And so that's where I think it could help to fit in.
Mhm.
One question, you didn't ask me this, Cher, but I'm going to offer this anyways because people
Okay.
ask me all the time. Say
Okay.
like, well, there's Cameron, there's no resistance reported yet for OA. Like, can we
Yeah.
just put it on all the time? Well, my answer would be like, no. And
Mhm.
doing the extended, like, and basically the mites can become resistant to anything if there's a
Sure.
constant pressure on them,
Mhm.
then they can develop resistance. And so one important consideration to make as more extended release option becomes available for beekeepers is that it should not be your primary source of thing that you just have it in all the time, right?
Right.
That's how we will develop resistance to
Sure.
oxalic acid. So right
I'm
now we
glad you
keep
said
that
that.
tool.
Well, and I look at the extended release being more like 42 days for Apivar. We hang that tab in there and 42 days later we pull that out. And it would just be nice because with the way we do OA primarily with the sublimation is we're going in, and we have to repeat it. And it would just be nice to be able to just hang something in there for a couple of few weeks and then come back, pull it out, do our test and verify that it did some good and then go about our business until next time around. So let's jump to any other products. Any other in your radar? Before you answer, I'm bad about doing that. Apivar is our go-to to punch. If we've got a bad, if we've got one that really shows bad, we go in and fire Apivar at it. But we are seeing resistance.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, just kind of like what we were just saying, like resistance is real when you
It's real.
are relying so heavily on one thing, it's going to happen. We got away with Amitraz use for a long time because it's a little bit different than some of the other synthetic compounds that we've used. Like Amitraz actually breaks down a little bit, and those breakdown products still hang around a long time, but the complete Amitraz doesn't. But
Mhm.
even still, since we've been all relying on it for such a long time, yeah, we're seeing it too, actually, here in Florida.
Are you? It's
And
lasted longer than Kumafos did.
oh, Kumafos was almost resisted before they even the product rollout.
The ink wasn't
Um,
dry.
yeah, so it's yeah, amortized resistance is a big issue because it is kind of our big
Go-to.
last resort. It's our big punch that we like to do too when colonies really need it.
Mhm.
So that we talked about at the beginning how beekeeping is not just a passive hobby anymore. I like it becomes something that requires more intense management. Amortized resistance is just going to up that up a little bit more, right? Like you're going to have to keep an eye on your mite populations and know when they are in that like kind of serious situation. We find colonies that are still susceptible, or find mites populations of mites that are still susceptible, then some that are becoming more resistant. And so our strategy right now with the ones that we're using and maintaining in our colonies or in our apiaries are just to use it kind of as necessary, like when we feel like we really need to bring some down, but we're
Mhm.
trying to more intensely manage and using other alternative chemicals that are going to have or non-chemical treatments like using uh, bees that are more hygienic or bred
Mhm.
for their Varroa resistance and their ability to keep mite populations low. So it's definitely an issue. I feel hopeful that like because there are some new products that are coming down the pike, soon we'll have some things to rotate and but I think for now, we got to make sure we're just doing our best to keep them low and not just relying only on Amitraz because we're only going to make the situation worse for ourselves
Agreed.
if we just all are like, oh, use it before it's gone.
Right. And right. I think something we ought to drive home is folks need to pull those strips out at the end of the time
Yeah.
period at 42 days. It's not, doesn't say 43 or 6 months. I can't tell you how many hives that we've dug into for others. And see a amethyst stick in there that's old. I
Yeah,
mean,
you know it's old. Yeah, it's been
it's
there.
old. And this is where the problem in lies. You've got to pull this out and rotate your treatments and also treat accordingly. If you've got a hive that's, you're showing 12 mites, and yes, you need to do something, but you might not have to throw everything at the kitchen sink. You can obviously come in with something, maybe Apigard or something that's a little less aggressive
Mhm.
to go after it and not just go so crazy on it.
Yeah. Well, maybe one thing, Shara, maybe after we're done talking, I can send you that article where we
Okay.
tested all those different chemical treatments because then we tried to like give some beekeepers some options and saying like, okay, well, here's some other alternatives you can do, and maybe you
I
can
love
link
that.
in that in
I'll
the
put it in the comments,
yeah.
in the notes section of this recording. Do y'all still have BMD? Does Jamie still do BMD?
So BMD, yeah, it exists. I know that they've been doing some heavy revisions to the website. I don't, I don't know enough about it to know if like those revisions are all in
In
place at
place.
the moment, but I know that they have been working on it in the recent past. And
That's super cool. If anybody
yeah.
that hasn't, I'll put a link to that as well. It's a tool,
Mhm.
and it answers a lot of questions, and it's been around for quite a few
It's
years.
been around for a while. It's definitely something, if you're new to beekeeping, that it could be really helpful.
Mhm.
Basically, the idea is that it's like WebMD, where you type in
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
symptoms of what you're feeling, and then it kind of gives you some ideas of what it could be, and you're horrified
Right.
because you think you've got all. But this
Right.
is meant to be maybe hopefully a little bit more accurate. Like it's got some pictures of some
Yes.
signs of infection or something that you might
Mhm.
be looking at, and you can kind of click through and be like, okay,
Mhm.
well, this is what I'm experiencing in this hive that you don't know what's going on, and it'll give you some suggestions of what's happening. So it's in concept and everything, it's really good. I know, like I said, they've been updating, trying to get better,
Yeah.
more accurate photos, trying to like split hairs a little bit more so they can
Mhm.
give maybe a more accurate diagnosis.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
I've referred back to it a couple of times, but I hadn't seen any updating going on in a while, but I haven't been in a minute, so I need to go back and check. I don't want to get, I don't want to run out of time before I ask some other questions. So viruses, um, I think viruses, because they're, to me, but for the most part, are unseen except for deformed wing. Um, Talk to us about viruses and the importance of why treating for Varroa matters when the unseen.
Sure. Well, when we talk about Varroa, right, we're always, the way Varroa really impact us is through viruses, right? Because as
Right.
the mite is feeding on the bee, I mean, they are maybe taking fat, they're taking a bit of hemolymph, which is the
Mhm.
bee's blood, they're getting some of those things, but the impact to the bee is actually really minimal. Like those a little bit of the fat and the hemolymph, like they'll survive that.
Sure.
Just like mosquitoes, I mean, they're transmitting viruses into their host as
Mhm.
they're feeding, and so that's what really impacts. And as you just said, besides like deformed wing virus, which causes the wings to kind of shrivel,
Mhm.
or as the bee is pupating and develops, they just don't develop the right way, and they kind of
Right.
shrivel the wings. So that's like a very telltale sign that what virus is happening. And other than like maybe sac brood, we don't really, there's not a lot that have like really clear
Sure.
signs of infection.
Mhm.
A lot of bee viruses cause bees to look a little bit dark, a little bit greasy. Some of them cause them to shake,
Mhm.
but most of the time they're just kind of unseen and just
Mhm.
happening in the background. Your bees are just not performing the way that they should. And when Varroa populations are high, your virus loads get really high, and that's when the bees just start falling apart. And so, um, viruses are a big issue in the fact that we don't really, for the most part, yet don't really have a good way to treat for viruses, right?
Mhm.
We just have ways to kind of mitigate the spread, which is like controlling Varroa. And so until there's a way to really affect them or like to reduce like viral infections, which I know some people are working on, and there could be some things coming down the pike. But for the most part, it's about controlling your mites to slow the spread of viruses. And
Mhm.
then just like how if we get a virus, we get a cold or flu or something, we got to eat properly. We got to like get
Right, that's
rest
right,
properly, right? Like you kind of have to put your bees on bed rest for a
exactly.
little bit. That's when I want to make sure that they have access to good nutrition. I'm feeding them like or like feeding them like sugar syrup or something if they don't have it. Bees with viruses get stressed really easy. So
Mm.
step one, control the mites. Step two, make sure that they have what they need if
Nutrition.
you get small hive beetle infestations or something,
Mhm.
or anything else that's
Stressors,
like,
stressors.
yeah, any more stress, then they
Mhm.
just tend to not do
Mhm.
well and they're gonna collapse. So relieving those stress is really what we can do at the moment, like for
Mhm.
viruses.
Isn't it funny that even in humans that there's no cure for virus.
Yeah,
There's not. I mean,
yeah.
we know that with
You're
COVID.
mitigating symptoms is what you're
Yeah,
trying to do.
well, all we are is mitigating symptoms, and so often, well, like COVID vaccines, not going political here, just it's inoculating with the dead virus. I wonder if that's what they're looking at is, and somehow inoculating the bees with the. I can't wait to see that come out.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see that come out. Um, Super cool. Golly, I think we've already hit an hour. Doggone it. Is there anything you want to add? Did I miss anything you want to tell us about?
Well, like I said before, is like my job that I'm so grateful to have, right? I was like, I love working with bees and beekeepers because there's just an endless amount of questions. There's always something for us to do. We're always limited on just resources of what we can do. So we try to find, I mean, I'm a big part of my job now is just like trying to write grants and trying to bring in some money so that we can keep doing projects and we can keep
Yeah.
communicating them to beekeepers. I think it's important. We've been kind of talking for the last hour about some of the problems that are facing honeybees and some of the health issues. I think it's important to at least end on a high note and say like, you can do this, we can do this, right? Together, like
Sure.
there is a lot of research being done. There are a lot of people focused on good management. There are potentially more treatments coming down the lane. There's good research. There's good people breeding. Like there are solutions out there. It's just going to take a little bit more time. So I never want to like discourage people from beekeeping. I mean, you can do this. It's just you have to maybe adjust your expectations a bit of like, oh, this will just be a fun hobby I have in my backyard when I'll get to it when I can get to it.
Yeah.
Doesn't really work like that anymore, but it is something certainly you can do
Mhm.
with the right attitude, right amount of dedication to it, and it can still be really enjoyable.
And I agree with that. And we have to, and it puts a little bit on us because we can make a difference. I mean, as hobby beekeepers, we can really make a difference and use the tools that you and your predecessors have provided for us and do them right, and we'll have good results. I think that we'll see that we will have good results and just stick with it. I agree with you. Ton of fun. Bees are just, it's a cool bug. I mean, I have my entire office full of stuff that will prove that I have a love for it. And I love my job too. So, well, Cameron, I can't thank you enough for this. I did have a few more questions, so we may holler back at you in
Yeah,
a few minutes.
that's right. We'll just talk another time. That'll be
Yeah,
great.
yeah, we will. Well, you keep me updated. Send me
The
the
papers we were
studies
talking
that
about.
you've got, and
Sure.
I will definitely share those with our listeners and I'll have you back on before you know it.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. See ya.